Again, the whole White Ribbon campaign is to raise public awareness of domestic violence. At this time, I yield to the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Representative Renee Elmers.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to thank my colleague and friend from New York and to point out the fact that over the years she has just been a tireless, dedicated supporter of women's issues, family issues, in giving her voluntary support of legal services to facilities that provide domestic violence havens in New York. She is a strong advocate for the White Ribbon Campaign, and I am proud to stand with her today in support of ending violence against women. We show our support today by wearing these white ribbons that represent the pledge to never commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women and girls. So let's start this discussion by defining the different forms of violence against women. Domestic violence occurs when one person in an intimate relationship uses a pattern of controlling, assaultive behavior to abuse, threaten, harass, and intimidate the other partner. This violence comes in many forms, and in its simplest terms, emotional abuse, name-calling, playing mind games, put-downs, threats, they can be physical or emotional, intimidation, using looks, smashing things, loud voices or actions to put you in a fear of what might happen. Isolation, controlling where you go, what you do, what you see, driving away friends and family, and of course sexual abuse. And the use of children, making you feel guilty about the children, using custody or visitation to harass you. None of these forms of abuse are acceptable, and part of the White Ribbon Campaign objective is to bring these issues to light. The bottom line here is that there are men in this country that want to protect the women they love, and through the White Ribbon Campaign, they are speaking out against these atrocities that take place. They are educating and calling on their fellow man to stop the violence. While we are taking a moment today to bring this important issue to light, I want to take a moment to commend the many facilities in my congressional district that are helping to provide a safe place for women, but also working toward bringing families back together by working through the violence issues. SAFE of Harnett County is a private, nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide safety and serve as an advocate for sexual assault and domestic violence victims, survivors, and their families. In Chatham County, North Carolina, the Family Rape and Violence Crisis Services has helped numerous people through effective programming. One victim said, "The price of the puzzles are coming together. The Family Rape and Violence Crisis Service has given me the strength to be who I was supposed to be on my own." In Johnston County, Safe Harbor is another private nonprofit agency that was created in 1984 with $500 and a donated phone line. This agency served around 3,000 victims in 2009. There are numerous other facilities in my congressional district that are also doing good work towards stemming the tide of domestic violence. I want to commend them for their hard work and dedication to the downtrodden. As I close today, I also want to commend the men who support the White Ribbon Campaign, and I applaud them for rising up and reaching out to educate. It takes a strong man to take this kind of action. Thank you, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you to the gentlewoman from North Carolina for your kind comments and for putting attention on the rape crisis centers, all of these centers who have dealt with. Because today, while we rise and we stand to call and bring to consciousness domestic violence, this is also a wonderful opportunity to thank the hundreds and thousands of people who volunteer in these shelters, who work for these agencies, who provide a safe haven for the women, the men, and the children who are abused, for the victims of domestic violence. My colleague talked about what these centers do. Vera House, the agency that I stand today to represent and to talk about, has expanded their services these days to outreach, advocacy, education, children's counseling. Children, as you heard from my colleague, are often the victims of domestic violence between spouses. They are the ones that suffer. Vera House offers counseling to these children. Most importantly, Vera House provides violence education for the perpetrators. If we are going to change behaviors, we've got to educate and to retrain the way the perpetrators think. Mr. Chairman, at this time I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, for over 14 years I have worked for Vera House as a pro bono legal volunteer. The Women's Bar Association in Syracuse, New York, put together a program where all attorneys, male and female, went through training to begin to address the needs of the victims of domestic violence. And through those 14 years, I began to get an up-close, clear understanding of the issue of domestic violence. The fact that domestic violence transcends socioeconomic, transcends race. Domestic violence is an issue that everyone faces. It crosses racial lines, it crosses economic lines, it crosses social lines. I recall one of my meetings with a woman whose husband was well known in the media in our town. You would never suspect, you would never think that she would be a victim of domestic violence, educated, financial means, and yet she was a victim. This is the pervasiveness of sexual assault and domestic violence. At this time, I believe my esteemed colleague, Judge Poe, would I yield to him.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding time, and I appreciate the work she's done with this issue and bringing it to the House attention today during this special order. Domestic violence, as you said, affects the entire country, all races, all economic groups. No one is exempt from this dastardly deed. It's my honor to serve as chairman of the Victims' Rights Committee. It's a bipartisan caucus. Congressman Jim Costa is the co-chair, and we hope to help promote the concept that victims are people too, and they have rights, and the same Constitution that protects defendants protects rights of victims as well. And I appreciate the gentlelady for being a member of that caucus. In my other life, before I came to Congress, I spent most of my time at the courthouse in Houston, 30 years as a prosecutor and as a criminal court judge, hearing criminal cases. And I saw a lot of people come down there, and a lot of people were down there because they had committed a crime against their family. And we need to understand that when you hurt someone in your family, it is not a family problem only. It is a criminal problem. And society must get to the point where we believe that it is socially unacceptable to commit crimes in the family. Probably the most important person in my life growing up was my grandmother. She never forgave me for being a Republican. She always considered herself a Democrat. God bless her. But one thing she said that was true was that you never hurt somebody you claim you love. And that's an absolute truth. People who claim they love somebody and then physically or emotionally or verbally abuse them are wrong and should be treated accordingly and held accountable for that conduct. It is very important that we recognize that domestic violence is a true issue. And we also need to understand as a culture and as a community that when a person is the victim of domestic violence, that it's not their fault. They are the victim. The offender, in most cases the husband, they are not the victim. The spouse is the victim, the wife. And defendants and husbands who commit those crimes can't use excuse and try to portray themselves as the one being the victim. The offender should be held accountable, and victims need to understand society and the law is on their side. Many victims of spousal abuse and domestic violence, they don't report it. They don't want the neighbors to know. They don't want the community to know. They feel like they're beaten down physically and emotionally, and sometimes they think it is their fault. It's not their fault. It's always the offender's fault. And so we as a culture, as a community in this country, whether we're from New York or from Texas, we need to let people know that if they are a victim of crime, if there is a lady that is abused by her husband, that society comes to her rescue and helps them any way we can, and to make sure we have a safe haven for them to go to if necessary, and that we make sure that that is financed so that the wife does not feel like, I have no place to go because I can't afford any place. And so she stays in that abusive relationship, and sometimes it ends in worse tragedy. Lastly, I'd like to talk about a very favorite person of mine who lives not far from here. Yvette Cade is just a regular person who lives in Maryland. And a few years ago, she was trying to separate and divorce from her husband. And a judge refused to grant her a restraining order, that she requested to keep her spouse away from her until all of the divorce had been worked out. And because the restraining order wasn't extended, her spouse went into a video store where she was working, carrying a jar of gasoline, and poured it over Yvette Cade's head and set that woman, that wonderful lady, on fire. Now, because of a person in the store who helped put out that fire that this spouse had committed against Yvette Cade, she survived. And it's things like that that we as a culture need to hold these culprits accountable for these crimes against people in their family. And we need to take wonderful ladies like Yvette Cade and make sure we treat them with tender care and make sure we have compassion on them to prevent any further damage to them physically, emotionally, and also prevent the consequences that other people may choose to commit against spouses in their own family. So I thank the gentlelady for the time, and it is important that we continue to preach this word throughout the country, that spousal abuse is something we're going to deal with as a nation, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you to my esteemed colleague from Texas. Thank you for your kind comments. And I thank all of the gentlemen who have the courage to stand up and call awareness to the issue of domestic violence, who stand against the violence against women, men, and children. Domestic violence is known by many names: domestic abuse, spousal abuse, family violence, intimate partner violence. It also takes many forms, from physical violence involving small things such as hitting or kicking, biting, shoving, or restraining. It can be emotional or it can be verbal, which manifests in many types of behavior: controlling, domineering, threatening, or humiliating. And we as a society have an obligation to raise the awareness of domestic violence so that women know, just as my esteemed colleague was talking about, it's not their fault. It is the fault of the perpetrator, whether that perpetrator is male or female. And that is the person who should be held accountable, not the victim. It can also be economic abuse, in which the abuser controls the victim's money. And this abuse we often see with the elderly. Another issue that we need to raise society's consciousness about the issues of elder abuse. Tragically, domestic violence is not a rare phenomenon, Mr. Chairman. The Centers for Disease Control estimate that domestic violence is a public health problem affecting over 32 million Americans, or 10% of the population. This is a tragedy of national proportion that society, again, we must raise up the consciousness of this horrific issue. The effects of domestic violence are staggering. Physical abuse can be bruises, broken bones, head injury, lacerations. But those are just the external physical wounds. Internal bleeding, chronic health conditions such as arthritis, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcers, migraines, miscarriages can also be linked to the physical abuses that victims sustain. But there are other effects as well. Many victims experience anxiety, stress, fear, guilt, depression. Guilt that what is happening to them is their fault. Again, we have to raise the awareness and raise the consciousness of society that it is the perpetrator's fault, not the victim's. Abuse victims also frequently manifest a condition we think of relative to our veterans, post-traumatic stress disorder. Victims with conditions have flashbacks, nightmares, or exaggerated responses. The effect of abuse can also be financial. Many victims courageously leave their abusers, but often lack the education, the skills, and the resources to find gainful employment to care for themselves and any children they might have. Mr. Chairman, I can recall sitting with women who are helpless. They sit across the table from you and they are helpless because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to get out of this situation. They don't understand that there is help and that society is willing to step up and provide safe haven for them and for their children. I spoke to a prosecutor who had a program that would go after deadbeat dads and go after the support so that women would be able to leave, be safe, and get support in order to support their children. I think that our society is coming around. We have wonderful organizations like Vera House, but we in this House must work hard. We must continue to raise awareness about these issues. The other societal scourge I referenced in my opening remarks is sexual assault. Sexual assault is, simply put, any unwanted contact of sexual nature. It does not matter if the victim is on a date or drinking when it occurs. It's never okay to force sexual contact on you against your will. Again, it's raising the awareness. It's letting society know, the vulnerable know, that it's not your fault and that you don't have to withstand these abuses. Like domestic abuse, sexual assault knows no privileged class immune to its ravages. Men, women, children, all ages, all races, all religions and ethnicities are victims. The effects are often similar to the victims of domestic abuse, and the effects can be especially troubling for children and men. I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I am passionate about veterans' issue. It is a committee that is bipartisan. It's a committee that works together because we all understand. We all understand the service and the sacrifice of our men and women in the military. I am the daughter and sister of veterans and believe that we owe a debt of gratitude to our men and women in uniform. But part of that debt extends to making sure that we don't turn a blind eye to sexual assault of women and men in our armed services. We have much to do, but I applaud the U.S. Air Force's recognition that sexual assault against both male and female airmen is a serious problem that needs a systemic solution. And while the Air Force has emphasized sexual assault prevention and responses for several years, they acknowledge that sexual assault is still a problem in the Air Force, as it is for our military services. In the Air Force's own words, sexual assault continues to burden our airmen and degrade our mission effectiveness. Sexual assault is a crime, and there is no place for this or this behavior in our Air Force. We must demand better of ourselves and of society. Consequently, they contracted with Gallup to conduct an anonymous poll about sexual assault in the Air Force. The findings were, to put it mildly, disturbing. The results of the survey in the 12 months prior were that 2,143 women and 1,355 men reported that they had been sexually assaulted, with the majority of female victims reporting that their assailant was a fellow airman. Even one victim is one too many. Sadly, it is unrealistic to think that our armed forces would be immune to the kinds of problems endemic in our society. We must engage as men, women, moms, dads, community leaders, airmen, soldiers, Marines, sailors, and guardsmen, churches, synagogues, mosques, youth centers, sports teams, schools, colleges. The list goes on. It will take all aspects of society to change a culture that increasingly devalues human life. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we are created in the image of God, and that for each of us, He has a purpose in our lives. No woman should ever have to fear for the safety of her unborn child because of an abusive husband. No child should ever dread going to bed because of a parent who is molesting her. And no man should be raped because blind justice turned a blind eye to prison rape. I have 6 children and 11 grandchildren, Mr. Speaker, and as a parent and a grandparent, I think about the lessons I have tried to teach to each of them. Some of those lessons were very successful, some less so. But I taught my kids to help others. Helping others includes living up to the pledge I mentioned earlier that I am making by wearing this white ribbon. I will not commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women, men, or children. And I commend the other members of this body for the white ribbons that they courageously wore to, again, raise the awareness of domestic violence and sexual assault. We have a serious problem in front of us, Mr. Speaker, in every community in America, but I have hope. America is an amazing country, and I am so privileged to be an American, to be free. I believe that the greatness of this country is a reflection of both the greatness of our founding and the greatness of our people. We are up to and equal to the task of fighting domestic violence and sexual assault if we put our American minds and our American spirits to it. So today, as I stand before you, Mr. Speaker, again to call attention to the scourge of domestic violence and sexual abuse, but it's at the same time celebrating the wonderful agencies and shelters and volunteers and people who have stepped forth, who are willing to take this issue on, who are willing to address it, who are willing to help the victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. We are blessed by their service, by their commitment to society, by their appreciation of the value of human life and the need to help those who need that help. Is there anyone else here to? So at this time, Mr. Speaker, I thank the House for the ability to be able to call attention to these issues. I want to, at this time, let Vera House know in Syracuse and all of the shelters and all of the agencies throughout this country, thank you for your service. Thank you for what you do for the victims of domestic violence and sexual assaults. And at this time, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back her time. The chair is prepared to recognize a Democratic member at this time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to address you here on the floor of the House of Representatives and to once again bring a case before you that I believe will be overheard in an effective way by the American people and responded to you by, of course, your good judicial and prudential judgment. I came here to the floor to talk about a number of things, and yet should always bring up the number one thing that's on my mind first, and I know that it's impossible for me to exhaust the subject, but I have given it a significant endeavor over the last year and a half, and now as things move towards ahead with the continuing resolution negotiations and debate that's taking place, and the major decisions that will be formed over the weekend by the leadership in the House and in the Senate, with consultation presumably with the White House, we expect to see some kind of a proposal come before one or both chambers next week before the clock ticks down on the continuing resolution that is temporarily funding this government in a piece of shell appropriations that should have never have happened. But that's a subject matter perhaps outside of what I should bring up today, and we should focus on the issues at hand. And they were this. There was a strong pledge that was made that if Republicans win the majority, Mr. Speaker, that we would cut $100 billion out of this fiscal year's budget. And I will submit that, recognizing that we were 5 months into this fiscal year before we had an opportunity to begin that process, that calculates out to be about $61.5 billion if you annualize the $100 billion. So, even though the initially proposed continuing resolution did not include those kind of cuts, there was an intense debate here in this Congress, driven by the 87 freshman Republicans, to get that number up to a number that was either $100 billion or $100 billion if you calculated it in an annualized basis. We did come together on that number, and this House did pass H.R. 1, which included in it $61.5 billion worth of cuts out of the fiscal year 2011. And even though the House didn't act in a, let me say the function of the House was not functional during the last 2 or 3 years at least of Speaker Pelosi's time, and there was no appropriations process that one could bring forward, and there was no budget that was brought forward, and therefore government was being run on stopgap measures of continuing resolutions. So, during the lame duck session being the period of time when Congress comes together to meet after an election. So I have said that lame duck session should only be to take care of the urgent issues that need to be handled before the new members of Congress can be sworn in. The old Congress, at least in theory, is delegitimized by the elections that take place last year on November 2nd. They no longer represent the will of the American people. That's been reflected in the election results all across the land. And this House was designed to be a quick reaction strike force, to be responsive to the American people. And so our founding fathers put it within the Constitution, never amended out, that House members are up for election every 2 years. And every 10 years there will be a census, and that census is designed then to be used to redistrict the districts, and we have now agreed that 435 is the maximum number of House members. And as the population moves and as the population grows, every 10 years we reset the congressional districts to, as accurately as possible, reflect the new population distribution in America. That goes on. Along with every 2 years there's an election. So the elections have two purposes. Every 10 years it is to reflect the population change, and every 2 years, including that 10-year census year election, which comes up in 2012, it's the quick reaction response to the will of the American people. Because our founding fathers understood that if you put people in this office and let them have tenure for life, like we're hearing about in states like Wisconsin or Ohio, where what tenure does to a person's due diligence, then there'd be people that would sit here forever and never be responsible to the American people. They recognized if they would set the Senate up in 6-year election cycles, that the Senate wouldn't be accountable within a short period of time, not within 2 years or 4 years, but in 6 years. That was intentionally so the senators would be more inclined to make long-term visionary decisions, and House members could come in as the shock troops, so to speak, to bring the quick reaction if the Congress got out of sync with the people. Well, it's pretty clear, Mr. Speaker, that the Congress got out of sync with the people last year. Actually, they began to get out of sync with the people well before that, more than 4 years ago. But when President Obama came in, he had huge majorities to work with in the House under Nancy Pelosi as Speaker and in the Senate with Harry Reid as leader, even to the extent that they had a massive majority in the House of Representatives and they had a filibuster-proof majority in the United States Senate. And so they felt their oats, so to speak. And their ideology drove them, I think, to, maybe they didn't know it, I think some of them knew it, and I believe the Blue Dogs that were in this House of Representatives that lost their elections last November knew it. They knew they were walking the plank. They knew they were going down into political Davy Jones's locker if they voted for Obamacare. But they did because of leverage, because of legislative shenanigans, because, and I'll say, Mr. Speaker, that to understand this, that Obamacare, for a long time here in the House of Representatives, was H.R. 3200, a bill that came through the Energy and Commerce Committee in a fashion that was at least envisioned to be a functional fashion through our Constitution and by our Founding Fathers. But it came through, and there were long, long debates in committee. But H.R. 3200, which was the product of the House, didn't make it to the floor for a vote. What came to the floor for a vote under Obamacare was a bill that was written in Speaker Pelosi's office. Well, 2,600 or so pages, plus or minus 100, and depends on the font type. But 2,600 or so pages of a bill that not one person had an opportunity to read it all, and before it came to the floor for a vote. And as much as it was studied by many, and there are quite a few Americans now that have read it all. But, Mr. Speaker, I'll submit this, that it has so many convoluted contraptions within it that there isn't a single person on the planet, no matter how intellectual they might be, no matter how much experience they might have, there's not one person that has the capability of reading the Obamacare bill and understanding all of the activities of that bill where it references other sections of the code, and you have to read it and switch back and forth, zigzag in and out of existing code, and look at the Obamacare piece of legislation, and at the same time understand the implications to Americans. It's one thing to understand what a bill does technically, and it's another to understand how people have to live underneath that legislation. So, H.R. 3200 kicked off to the side. The product of the actual committee didn't come to the floor. The product of the Speaker's office, her staff, many of them young, junior people, writing up a bill that they thought was right for America, dumped down on us here to be, in a short period of debate and a vote, be passed by the House, and could not and would not have passed the House the day it was brought to the floor for a vote, except for a couple of little promises. One of those promises was that the Senate would pass a reconciliation package, which put other pieces into it in order to avoid the filibuster rule in the Senate. So in order to get that done, they had to bring some things that couldn't get passed under the filibuster rule in the Senate, write them up in a separate bill. Well, somehow that bill couldn't have been amended to the one here on the floor because that wouldn't have passed. And furthermore, the Obamacare bill that was written in Nancy Pelosi's office couldn't have passed here on the floor because Bart Stupak had a dozen Democrats that locked up with the Republicans and said, we aren't going to vote for a bill that funds abortion. Nancy Pelosi wrote a bill that funds abortion. Harry Reid wrote a reconciliation package that they promised to send over to the House that did the things that his senators needed to have happen and the House members needed to have happen. And the piece of Obamacare that was written by Nancy Pelosi that funds abortion was going to satisfy the Stupak dozen if the President signed an executive order that amended the legislation that was before the House. Now, Mr. Speaker, you know, I wouldn't expect every American to be completely understanding this convoluted process. In fact, I'd expect most of them to be very confused about this. This was designed to be a confusing process. And the idea, the very idea that the President of the United States would take an oath to office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, that everybody in this chamber would do the same thing and everybody in the Senate would do the same thing, and then believe somehow, all you have to do is read Article 1 of the Constitution, and one can easily conclude that the President cannot amend a piece of legislation by signing an executive order. He does not have the authority to do so. That is a constitutional violation, and I have, in the very similar, if not exactly identical language that is in the Iowa Constitution, gone to court to prove exactly that when former Governor Vilsack thought that he could rewrite the Code of Iowa by executive order. And the case of King versus Vilsack is in the books, Mr. Speaker, and the court vacated the executive order of the governor of the state of Iowa because he thought he could legislate by executive order. I said he couldn't. We went to court. The judge said he couldn't, and it's resolved in that issue, and the point is conceded by former Governor, now Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. That same tactic was used by the President of the United States, Barack Obama, when he signed an executive order that was designed to amend the bill that was about to pass. Actually, he signed it after the bill passed. The bill that passed on the condition that the President would sign an executive order to take care of the funding for abortion, and that the Senate would pass a reconciliation package that fit the other needs. Why couldn't we do this under what we call here in regular order? Why couldn't we have a committee process that would work a bill through? Well, they did, but Nancy Pelosi dropped that one in the trash, wrote her own. Why couldn't they allow the reconciliation package, if it had any merit, to be amended onto the Obamacare legislation, even if it's the legislation that was written in Speaker Pelosi's office and rejected that out of committee? Why couldn't that have been an amendment that could have been voted on up or down here in the House of Representatives attached to the same piece of legislation? Why couldn't they have put the language of Barack Obama's executive order that supposedly says the federal government's not going to fund abortion? Why couldn't they have put that into the bill too and had an honest debate on an honest piece of legislation? Why not? Well, because it wasn't. Because they could not pass it under an honest process. It had to be a legislative shenanigan process. That's what we got. And as that bill went to final passage that night, and I got a little bit of sleep that night, not much, I drafted legislation to repeal Obamacare. Probably at the same time, me not knowing that, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota drafted legislation to repeal Obamacare. We each got our legislation drafts down, and they came to us shortly after 9 o'clock that morning, exactly the same 40 words, within 3 minutes of each other, that said we're going to, now I'm going to do this a little bit in summary, but only 40 words, that we would repeal, this Congress would repeal the Act of Obamacare, and it references the two sections that are the components by number, by bill number, and the last words of that repeal bill is, as if it had never been enacted. So we introduced that legislation actually separately. I joined on hers and she on mine, and we went to work to get signatures to move the repeal bill. That turned into a discharge petition with 173 signatures on it. And that would be throughout the summer and into the fall of last year that we were getting signatures on the discharge petition. And Mr. Speaker, you will know that if there's 218 signatures, a majority of the House of Representatives, on a discharge petition that represents a bill, that bill bypasses committee, and the Speaker can't block it, and it comes to the floor to be voted up or down without amendment. That's what a discharge petition does. Well, it took us a long ways down the line of a commitment to repeal Obamacare, and it was a tool that was used by several, and I'll say many, candidates for Congress, who are now, some of them elected to this Congress, part of the 87 freshman Republicans, all of whom ran on the repeal of Obamacare. And I believe, and don't know this, and I've heard no exceptions, but I believe it's also likely that all of them ran on defunding Obamacare, cutting the funding off, because we knew that a Republican majority here in the House could pass the repeal of Obamacare, which we did in the second week here under H.R. 2. The second highest priority for Speaker Boehner was the repeal of Obamacare. H.R. 1 was funding the government. H.R. 2 was repealing Obamacare. That legislation passed the House with a resounding solid bipartisan vote and went over to the Senate, where every Republican in the Senate voted to repeal Obamacare. We committed to cutting off the funding to Obamacare, and that's the next step. And I said since last July at least to shut off all the funding to Obamacare in every appropriations bill that comes out of the House of Representatives. Well, H.R. 1 was the single piece of legislation where we had the maximum amount of leverage. That's the funding for the duration of the year for all of the functions of government. We learned sometime last year that there were automatic appropriations, and deceptively, I believe, written into Obamacare that are designed to create this perpetual money machine that funds the implementation of Obamacare. Some call it mandatory spending. I do not. I call it automatic spending. There's automatic spending in Obamacare written into it, and the number's still on my hand in Sarah Palin fashion, $105.5 billion automatically appropriated, spent in an authorization bill completely outside of regular order of this Congress, with a handful of exceptions in short term and few dollars, but in scope and in magnitude, no one's ever tried, no one's ever had the audacity to try to impose an automatic appropriation on this Congress that would be $105 billion. Some of that money goes beyond that. That's just 10 years. Some of it's appropriated, Mr. Speaker, in perpetuity. $1 billion a year here and $1 billion there that goes on every year. They can't be stopped unless Congress goes in and shuts it off. And that's what we need to do, Mr. Speaker. We need to do this in every bill. This continuing resolution that's before us now must include within it the language that cuts off the funding to Obamacare, the current and the previous, the language that cuts off the automatic spending in Obamacare. There are $18.6 billion for fiscal year 10, most of it not spent yet, that implements Obamacare, $18.6 billion of the $105.5, and there's another $4.95 billion in 2011 that automatically appropriates to Obamacare. That's $23.6 billion, Mr. Speaker, that goes on to kick Obamacare in. It's been found unconstitutional by 2 federal courts, and it's been rejected by the American people, who sent 87 freshman Republicans here to repeal Obamacare. And we're sitting here looking at $23.6 billion in automatic spending. We're struggling to cut the budget by $61.5 billion. Well, let's do that. But over here is $23.6 billion in automatic spending that goes on. And if, as I believe, Harry Reid is committed to shutting our government down, and by the way, the Majority Leader in the United States Senate speaks, I think, as a proxy for the President. What's the President want here? Well, he wants to delay. Or he'd be telling Harry Reid, pass something. And I believe Harry Reid wants to delay and then shut down. They have convinced me that their intention all along was to shut down this government. That's why they agreed to a short-term continuing resolution till March 4th, so they could posture themselves to be in a position to force a shutdown of the government, and they think that they can blame it on Republicans, and then the public will punish Republicans at the polls. Well, Mr. Speaker, I will submit that's not the way it is and not the way it will be. Because John Boehner and Eric Cantor's leadership have demonstrated clearly that this majority in this Congress, the Speaker's office, the Majority Leader's office, down the line, have 3 times, H.R. 1, 2-week CR, 3-week CR, demonstrated there's the dollars for the legitimate functions of government. There's the dollars for it. We provided it 3 times here, and 3 times the Senate hasn't moved on anything of their own initiative. So they've convinced me that their goal all along was to shut down the government, and if I didn't believe that, all I had to do was listen to Senator Schumer or Howard Dean or some of the language coming out of Majority Leader Reid. I'm convinced that they are committed to shutting this government down. If they do that, we need to say to them, here's all the resources again, and no money to implement Obamacare. If there's no money to implement Obamacare, but all the money that's necessary for the responsible, fiscally responsible, legitimate functions of government, and they go in and shut this government down and point their fingers at us, the American people will know differently. They'll understand that it always was the strategy to shut the government down by the Democrats in the Senate and the White House, and that we're committed to keeping it open, but we cannot be allowing the funding to go forward to an unconstitutional takings of American liberty, which is Obamacare, on its face. It's unconstitutional in 4 different ways. It's irresponsible, it's unsustainable, it can't be funded, and we can't find the funds to fund it all. It's $2.6 trillion in outlays in the first 10 years. We must, Mr. Speaker, cut off the automatic funding to Obamacare and any funding going forward to Obamacare. Let the courts decide, and we decide here in the House of Representatives to draw a line, draw a bright line, and stand firm. That all needs to happen in that way. And history tells us this, Mr. Speaker, that when there was a government shutdown, the argument last time was overspending. Overspending, most of it within either Medicare or Medicaid. If my memory serves me correctly, it was over $300 billion in cuts. Whether it would be a plus up or a plus down from that, you can't take a stand on a money figure. You can't say, I'm going to stand and fight on $300 billion, but if they lower my cuts down to $299 billion, then I'm not, you know, then let's say if they lower the cuts down to $299, I'm going to be a no. Or if they take it up to $301 billion, I'll be happier yet. You cannot stand on a principle that is a dollar figure, because whatever you pick, it's always going to be on a sliding scale. It can always be, it's not a principle. We're standing on $61.5 billion right now. Well, if they lower those cuts down to $61 billion, do we say no? I think that the Democrats on the other side understand that. That's why they've floated this number of $33 billion in cuts. They haven't said where they were willing to accept it yet. They got to $33 billion in cuts this way. They took $61.5 billion, divided it by 2, and rounded it up to $33 billion. That's how they arrived at the number. There isn't any question in my mind about that. And they want to be able to say, well, we met you halfway and a little more. So you should be happy that we're willing to compromise. To them, compromise is take the number, cut it in half, and then if you can't get agreement, cut it in half again, and they call that compromise. Well, I've said money itself is not a principle. You can't stand on something strongly unless you're standing on a principle. Well, a principle is an unconstitutional 2,600-page takings of American liberty, the nationalization of our skin and everything inside it, Obamacare. That's a principle. It's completely unsuitable for an American people that live with the liberty and freedom that God gave us, that our founding fathers so well articulated in the Declaration and in the Constitution. It's part of our tradition, part of our history, and part of the inspiration for the entire globe to be knocking on the door, wanting to come to the United States of America because of what? Liberty, Mr. Speaker. Listed out in the Bill of Rights: freedom of speech, religion, and the press, freedom to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances, Second Amendment to keep and bear arms, the right to own property, protection from double jeopardy, to be tried by a jury of your peers, the philosophy of federalism that devolves the powers down to the states or the people respectively. All of this and going on, equal protection under the law and the 14th Amendment, on and on and on. These are the inspirations for a vigorous people, a people that have a belief and a common cause and a common culture, a cultural continuity of belief in our liberty. And they would impose us what? Socialized medicine, a federal takings of our right to manage our own health care, and part of that management would be to buy a health insurance policy that's driven by the marketplace that people demand and want, that would have any of the bells and whistles that the market demands, that have every bell and whistle that the market demands, and should not have mandates imposed on it by the federal government that are imposed within the states. And people should be able to buy their own health insurance policy across state lines. The protection for the monopolies of state health insurance companies is anti-market. It's anti-free market. It's anti-freedom. And John Shadeg's bill that he pushed so hard while he was here needs to be something that goes to the President's desk that allows people to buy insurance across state lines, so that a young man 23 years old paying $6,000 a year for a typical policy in New Jersey laden with mandates could instead go buy that typical policy in Kentucky for not $6,000 but $1,000. Doesn't that help our costs? Doesn't that get more people insured? Doesn't that do the right thing and protect people? That's just one. I could take you down through a list of 7 or 8 or 9 good, solid Republican ideas, most, if not all of which, can come to this floor as standalone pieces of legislation, be sent over to the Senate where Harry Reid would push them off his desk into the trash can. They wouldn't have the respect of going in his desk drawer. Why? Because they're liberty-oriented, they're free market-oriented, they're constitutional. and they're principled, and it gives people back their liberty. But this country, the United States of America, this vigorous people, that we have a vitality that's unique. We have all of the vitality that comes from the rights that I've talked about. We have the vitality of the free enterprise system, which is the foundation of our economic system. And I'd point out that there are flashcards that newly arriving immigrants, or those I should say that are studying for their citizenship test, mostly that's 5 years in, studying for their citizenship test, flashcards. And on one side it'll say, who's the father of our country? You snap it over and it'll say George Washington. Next card, who emancipated the slaves? Snap that card over, Abraham Lincoln. Next card, what is the economic system of the United States of America? Free enterprise capitalism. That is an axiom of faith of the American people, that we are free to spend our money as we choose. Obamacare commandeers our paycheck, Mr. Speaker. It takes it over. And they say you must buy this health insurance policy that is approved or produced by the federal government, and if you don't do that, we're going to send the IRS in to punish you, to fine you. It's a punishment if you don't buy it. If they can pass a law that requires you to buy a product that's produced or approved by the federal government, if they can commandeer 5% or 10% or in many cases 25 or 40 or even 50% of your payroll to pay for a health insurance premium, if they can commandeer any part of your earnings and force you to buy something, the next step is they can commandeer your money to buy a General Motors car because their investment may not be doing so well, or a Chrysler. Or maybe you could buy some shares in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They took that over too, didn't they? Maybe they could force you to invest in the student loan program. They took that over too, didn't they? They could force you to buy a certain kind of wash machine, a certain kind of shoes. And they can also force you at that point, you have to buy so much Diet Pop instead of non-Diet Pop, so many ratios of carrots versus candy bars. They can commandeer, if they can commandeer 1% of your paycheck and force you to buy a product, they can commandeer 100% of your paycheck and force you to buy all products to the point where you are enslaved by the federal government. How can that be constitutional for a free people? Mr. Speaker, I will submit it is not, and it cannot be, and that's why this House voted resoundingly to repeal Obamacare. That's why every Republican here and in the Senate voted to repeal Obamacare. That's why we must cut off all funding to implement or enforce Obamacare in every appropriations bill. And that's why they deceptively plugged into Obamacare the automatic appropriations of $105.5 billion, and that's why they front-loaded it with $18.6 billion in the FY 2010 budget to intensively implement Obamacare, and that's why there's another $4.95 billion in this fiscal year, $23.6 billion sitting there in the pot. And think of this, Mr. Speaker. If they're successful in forcing a shutdown of this government, and while they're busily trying to point their fingers at those of us who provide the resources to keep it open, we'd still see $23.6 billion hard at work implementing Obamacare. The lights could go off in federal offices all over America because of a shutdown, but you could drive down and look at where the lights are on. Guess what? That's the $23.6 billion still there, still implementing Obamacare like Santa's little elves, making sure we have socialized medicine before the lights come back on. That's what we're faced with, Mr. Speaker. That's what we must draw a line. We must stand and do this fight. The fight's inevitable. So choose the ground when the Army's the strongest and on the ground that we can stand to fight on. And that's this. Provide the resources for the legitimate functions of this government, not for the illegitimate functions of this government. And if the President of the United States, working through his mouthpiece, Harry Reid, or directly, brings about a shutdown, it will be about a bright line between all of the legitimate functions of government versus perhaps a legislative tantrum, an act of audacity and narcissism that his signature piece of legislation called Obamacare means more to the President of the United States than all of the functions of government put together, Mr. Speaker. For all those reasons, I say this is the week to draw the line. This is the week to do the fight. This is the week to do the battle. We have to have it. We can't avoid it. Let's get it over with so we can get on with the legitimate functions of the United States government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to pay tribute to a good friend and a former colleague who passed away this past week, a true trailblazer, former Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro. She's one of the few people in history who can lay claim to being a first. She was the first woman to be nominated for Vice President on a major ticket, and also the first Italian-American to achieve that honor. She was a leader, an advocate, a devoted public servant, and beloved family member. I'm also honored, most of all, to have been able to call her a friend. The history that has unfolded after she stood on the stage in San Francisco in 1984 to accept her party's nomination for Vice President has happened thanks to her taking those first steps. I remember being there at the convention in San Francisco in 1984, and how proud we were that one of our own, a New Yorker, Jerry Ferraro, was being nominated as Vice President. At the same time, our governor at the time, another New Yorker, Mario Cuomo, gave the keynote address at that convention. Since that time, of course, another woman has appeared on the ballot, major party, for Vice President, and another came within a handful of delegates of becoming the first presidential nominee. Strong women in politics and business are not the exception any longer, they're mainstream. As Jerry declared in San Francisco, quote, "I stand before you to proclaim tonight, America is the land where dreams can come true for all of us." Jerry grew up, as I did, in New York City, and went into teaching before going to law school, as I did, and grew up in the South Bronx as a young person, as I did as well. She headed the new Special Victims Bureau of the Queens County District Attorney's Office and was a Queens criminal prosecutor before being elected to the House of Representatives in 1978. While serving in the House, she created a flex-time program for public employees, which has become the basis of such programs in the private sector. She also successfully sponsored the Women's Economic Equality Act, which ended pension discrimination against women, provided job options for displaced homemakers, and enabled homemakers to open IRAs. You know, when I think of Jerry Ferraro, I think of her as a typical representative of the middle class in New York's outer boroughs. She had a certain kind of combination of street smarts and book smarts and a certain kind of sense and moxie, knowing how to get ahead and what to say. We're all better off, no question. America's a better place because of the accomplishments of Jerry Ferraro. Women from coast to coast are better off because of her, but all Americans, women or not, are better off because of what she did. She took those first steps in 1984 when she was nominated. 64 years after women won the right to vote, a woman had removed the men-only sign from the White House door. I thought it would be good at this point to read some of the things that the New York Times had mentioned about the highlights of Jerry Ferraro. She was considered very ideal for television, a down-to-earth, streaked blonde, peanut butter sandwich-making mother whose personal story resonated powerfully. Brought up by a single mother who had crocheted beads on wedding dresses to send her daughter to good schools, Ms. Ferraro had waited until her own children were school-aged before going to work in the Queens District Attorney's Office. In the 1984 race, many Americans found her breezy style refreshing. "What are you, crazy?" was one of her familiar expressions. She might break into a little dance behind the Speaker's platform when she liked the introductory music. Jerry Ferraro, Geraldine Ann Ferraro, was born on August 26, 1935, in the Hudson River city of Newburgh, New York, where she was the fourth child and only daughter of Dominic Ferraro, an Italian immigrant who owned a restaurant and a five-and-dime store, and the former Antonetta L. Corriere. One brother died shortly after birth, and another, Gerard, died in an automobile accident when he was 3, 2 years before Geraldine was born. Geraldine was born at home. Her mother, who had been holding Gerard at the time of the crash and who had washed and pressed his clothes for months after his death, would not go to the hospital before the delivery and leave the third brother, Carl, at home. Geraldine was named for Gerard, but in her book, Framing a Life, a family memoir, written with Catherine Whitney, Ms. Ferraro said her mother had emphasized that she was not taking his place. "Jerry is special," she quoted her mother as saying, "because she is a girl." Her mother soon sold the store and the family's house and moved to the South Bronx. With the proceeds from the sale of property in Italy that her husband had left her, she sent Geraldine to the Marymount School, a Catholic boarding school in Tarrytown, New York. She sent Carl to military school. Tarrytown, New York is part of my district. Ms. Ferraro's outstanding grades earned her a scholarship to Marymount College in Tarrytown, from which she transferred to the school's Manhattan branch. She commuted there from Queens, where her mother had moved by then. An English major, Ms. Ferraro was editor of the school newspaper and an athlete and won numerous honors before graduating in 1956. "Delights in the unexpected," the yearbook said about her. After graduating, Ms. Ferraro got a job teaching in a public grade school in Queens. She later applied to Fordham Law School, where an admissions officer warned her that she might be taking a man's place. Admitted to its night school, she was one of only 2 women in a class of 179 and received her law degree in 1960. Ms. Ferraro and John Zaccaro, whose family was in the real estate business, were married on July 16, 1960, 2 days after she passed the bar exam. She was admitted to the New York State Bar in 1961 and decided to keep her maiden name professionally to honor her mother. She was admitted to the United States Supreme Court Bar in 1978. For the first 13 years of her marriage, Ms. Ferraro devoted herself mainly to her growing family. Donna was born in 1962, John in 1964, and Laura in 1966. Ms. Ferraro did some legal work for her husband's business, worked pro bono for Women in Family Court, and dabbed in local politics. In 1970, she was elected president of the Queens County Women's Bar Association. In 1973, after her cousin, Nicholas Ferraro, was elected Queens District Attorney, she applied for and got a job as an assistant district attorney in charge of a Special Victims Bureau, investigating rape, crimes against the elderly, and child and wife abuse. The cases were so harrowing, she later wrote, that they caused her to develop an ulcer, and the crime-breeding societal condition she saw, she said, planted the seeds of her liberalism. When she was elected to the House, she became very good friends with Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker. Ms. Ferraro found her opportunity in 1978 to run for Congress when James Delaney, a Democratic congressman from a predominantly working-class district in Queens, announced his retirement. In the House, Ms. Ferraro was on the Public Works and Transportation Committee, and in doing that, she successfully pushed for improved mass transit around LaGuardia Airport. Mr. O'Neill, Tip O'Neill, the Speaker, took an immediate liking to her, and in her 3 terms, she voted mostly with the party's leadership. Her friendship with Mr. O'Neill, because of him, she was elected Secretary of the Democratic Caucus, thanks in part to him, giving her influence on committee assignments, and in 1983 she was awarded a seat on the House Budget Committee. It was Ms. Ferraro's appointment as chairwoman of the 1984 Democratic Platform Committee that gave her the most prominence. In her book, Ferraro, My Story, she said that in becoming the first woman to hold that post, she owed much to a group of Democratic women, congressional staffers, rights activists, labor leaders, and others who called themselves Team A and who lobbied for her appointment. Now, when she was running, there were a lot of slights, being the first woman. People were either adjusting or not adjusting to a woman on a national ticket. Mississippi's Agriculture Secretary called Ms. Ferraro young lady and asked if she could bake blueberry muffins, to which Ms. Ferraro said, "Yes, I can. Can you?" Jerry Ferraro always had a smile and always had a kind word and never said no to someone needing her help. Even though I came to the House 4 years after she left, I got to know her very well and truly feel a loss in having her pass away. Near the end of 1998, she learned that she had multiple myeloma, bone marrow cancer that suppresses the immune system. Before then, she was later ambassador to the United States Human Rights Commission during the Clinton administration, and we remember her as co-host of the CNN program Crossfire from 1996 to 1998. She wrote books and articles and did business consulting. She addressed her place in history in a long letter to the Times in 1988, noting that women wrote to her about how she had inspired them to take on challenges. Quote, always adding a version of, I decided if you could do it, I can too. Schoolgirls, she said, told her they hoped to be president someday and needed advice. Jerry Ferraro said, I'm the first to admit that, were I not a woman, I would not have been the vice presidential nominee. But she insisted that her presence on the ticket had translated into votes that the ticket might otherwise have not received. In any event, she said, the political realities of 1984 had made it all but impossible for the Democrats to win that year, no matter what the candidates or their gender. Quote, throwing Ronald Reagan out of office at the height of his popularity, with inflation and interest rates down, the economy moving, and the country at peace, would have required God on the ticket, Ms. Ferraro wrote, and she was not available. Geraldine Ferraro is survived by her husband, 3 children, and 8 grandchildren. I must say that I was disappointed that in the House we didn't have a plane to take all the members to the funeral yesterday. I'm sorry about that because, frankly, I think it was a bit disrespectful. But we all remember Jerry Ferraro. We remember her as a true New Yorker. We remember her as a true American. And we remember her as someone who, each of us, she inspired to push on with whatever goal we want to achieve, no matter how daunting or impossible it looked. That's how I'll remember Jerry Ferraro. I remember her at the 1984 convention standing on the stage with Walter Mondale, both putting their arms around each other, and even then there was question about how they would interact, as it was the first time a woman was on a national ticket. I will miss my friend Jerry. We will all miss her, but we are all better people because of her. Rest in peace, Jerry. We will always remember you, and so will the history books. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back.